Hi, welcome to Wetpixel Live. My name's Adam Hanlon, I'm the editor of Wetpixel, and I'm joined today by regular contributor Alex Mustard. Hi, Alex.
Morning, Adam. Nice to see you.
Good morning. Nice to see you, as always. So I was diving last week at one of my local dive sites, and I bumped into our friend and fellow underwater photographer, Justin Beaver. And Justin suggested that a good topic for an episode of Wetpixel Live would be the accessories we attach to our lenses inside the port. So obviously we've covered wet diopters and wet lenses. These are the bits that we actually attach to the lens inside the housing. And the first thing that we thought we might discuss, or I thought I might ask Alex to talk about, are extension tubes. So Alex, what is an extension tube? How do you use one?
Well, I think this is the accessory I see most people using. Perhaps not purpose inside their port, but
yeah,
doesn't have to be a Nikon one.
No.
I'm quick to say that the Canon ones give exactly the same problems. So extension tubes. So extension tubes used to be much more popular in underwater photography. Basically, extension tubes do exactly the same thing as a diopter, a close-up wet diopter or a dry diopter. In terms of how the camera works. They allow a lens to focus closer.
Yep.
Extension tubes are actually very cheap to buy.
Yep.
The downside of using them compared to a wet diopter and any dry accessory this goes for is it's then on for the whole dive. Yep. So I think one of the reasons that dry accessories, these inside the port accessories, are less popular these days is because we have such good wet accessories. Yep. I think 20 years ago when there weren't any wet diopters and things, then of course we were all using dry accessories because it's all we had. Yep. And we were accepting that we were putting them on for the whole dive. Yep. So extension tubes work like a wet diopter or a wet lens, a close-up lens, or a dry close-up lens or diopter, in that they bring your focus distance of your lens closer. So you know, if you're using, say, a normal macro lens and you've hit minimum focus, you then normally put your wet diopter on the front, and it allows you to get closer still. A diopter will do exactly the same. An extension tube will do exactly the same as that, but it's on for the whole dive. They typically sell them in sets, and the most common usually come in sets of 3, and the most common spacings for them are: this is a 12 mil, they have a 24 mil, and a 36 mil. A 36 mil on its own on a 100 mil macro lens on a crop sensor SLR is about the same as a +5 diopter, like a subsea +5 or something like that. However, the strength, the equivalent strength of an extension tube varies with the angle of the lens. So the wider the lens you use with the extension tube, the shorter the extension tube you need to bring the focus close. So with a big long 105 lens or 100 mil lens on a crop sensor camera, they have a relatively weak effect. On a 60 mil lens on a full frame camera, they have a much stronger effect. You can buy completely manual ones, which are very popular for land photography, where people just do all their macro on a tripod, all in manual. But for underwater photography, you really want to get one with the electronic contacts on them, so that your autofocus and everything keeps working.
Passes through,
and these will work perfectly happily with modern, internal focusing internal motor lenses, or they can also deal with lenses powered from the back as well. So they work both ways.
It's also important to point out that optically, obviously, there's no optical elements in this. It's purely a spacer. So you're getting the full optical performance of the lens. Now, obviously, we're very fortunate in that we have lots of very good optical wet diopters available now. But certainly, this is optically a really good solution. It produces a very, very good image. And so it's certainly something to consider if you plan to do a specific. You're going to leave your wet diopter on for the whole dive, then you may as well actually add a extension tube.
And especially a small one like the 12, it just gives you a little bit. If you always feel your lens you're hitting that minimum focus a little bit, they can be a really, really good solution. They're really cheap and very light. So they're, you can get a set of electronic ones for, sub probably $50 in range, maybe $75. They're, really cheap and light. The downside of them is you're going to need a port extension to use them, which is not so cheap. So if you obviously have a port extension from another lens, that's fine. But that can be the downside of using them, is the port extensions. And particularly with the very thin ones, can be quite difficult to find a really thin port extension on some systems. But that's just something to bear in mind. Anyway.
So the second option next is these guys, well, this is actually one attached, is a teleconverter. Okay, and maybe we should split the discussion in two different directions. In that we have teleconverters used with macro lenses and teleconverters used with wide-angle lenses. Though the effect is the same, I think we use them slightly differently. So, Alex, perhaps starting off with macro lenses, perhaps.
Yeah, I think the macro lens fits more more with the tradition of teleconverters.
Yeah.
Anyone who does sort of nature photography on land with telephoto lenses will be used to attaching a teleconverter to the back of that lens to give the lens more reach, more magnification.
Yeah.
And we can do exactly the same thing underwater with our macro lenses and put the teleconverters that are designed to work with telephoto lenses on land behind particularly our longer macro lenses. So this is a 2 times teleconverter. This is a Nikon one. They typically come in flavors of the Nikon ones come in 1.4, 1.6 and 2 times. Yeah. And I think Canon's are pretty similar. And the stronger isn't necessarily better. This was just the first one I picked up. Yeah. And so if I use this behind a 100mm macro lens, it converts it into a 200mm macro lens, which is quite a long, tight lens. The 1.4, it makes it to about a 150, which is probably more usable. Yeah. These have lenses in them, so they increase the magnification of the lens, not just help you get closer. Yeah. So they're useful underwater when maybe we can't get that close to a subject. I use this a lot, say, for example, for jawfish. If I want to get a jawfish swimming out of its burrow, holding eggs in its mouth, it'll generally, if I'm over the top of the burrow, I can get shots of it looking up from the burrow with its eggs in its mouth. If I want it to be relaxed and swimming in the water, I need to probably be about a meter or so away, if not further. And in order to fill the frame with a small subject to that distance, I use a teleconverter. Yeah. They're also useful to carry on a trip because it can allow you to maybe shoot some topside telephoto shots when you haven't taken a dedicated topside telephoto lens. You can stick this with a 100mm, 105 and get that. I have to say, though, the downside of these is that they slow the autofocus down. They cut the amount of light coming through the camera, and the more you put on, the slower your autofocus gets. Yep. Modern cameras have got much better at focusing in those conditions, but these can really slow things down. So a lens that you're used to snapping into focus really quickly, with a teleconverter can be a bit more focusing. And I tend to use them with a thumb focuser, a back button focus, because actually I'll use the slow autofocus to get most of the way in range and then do the final rocking all manually, because with these they will hunt a lot more, particularly if you're shooting through more water. That also makes them hunt. So, and that's how these are mainly for macro lens.
So one of the things you have to watch out a little bit with compatibility as well, and even then the instructions seem to be somewhat contradictory. In that, I think if I remember rightly, last thing I heard, Nikon don't recommend the 1.4, 1.6, and 2 with their 105mm, and it works perfectly. So,
exactly. Yeah. So this lens says in the instruction manual doesn't work with a 105mm, and I've taken loads of pictures with it.
Yeah. So the best thing here would be to go on the Wetpixel forum and find out what other people are doing and see what works.
Now I'm just going to. Well, this is in my hand, Adam. The reason we can't use these ones with the lens with a wide-angle lens is most of these ones for telephoto lenses, the front element sticks out, and so physically we can't stick a wide-angle lens on these Nikon ones. Yeah. And which is why we use for wide-angle lenses the one you've got there, and this one here without a lens on it. Yeah. This is a Kenko. It's often got different names on it. This has got Tele Plus and everything written on it. A Kenko 1.4 teleconverter, or 1.5 actually, and the front element is indented in, so you can then put any lens you like on them. Yeah. And we can use them with wide angles.
And this is as Alex was saying, is a Kenko Teleplus HD Pro. It's their latest version that's designed to deal with higher definition cameras. And this is a 1.4. This is attached to a Tokina 1017. And this is quite a common use of teleconverters as well. So this is obviously using it on a fisheye. And the effect that it has on a fisheye is it basically reduces the angle of view and slightly defishes the image. So this is quite a good combination that often gets used for people when they're shooting wide angle subjects, which tend to be a bit further away. So possibly bigger animals, sharks, so on and so forth. So with the 1017, you can have it zoomed in at the 17mm end, and then the combination of that and the magnification of the diopter further pulls the subjects in closer, and you get again, a similar kind of telephoto type effect, obviously in this case with a wide angle lens. So it pulls it in.
Yeah, and one important thing to say is that if you fit that lens on the 10-17, which is one of the best lenses to use the teleconverter with, is you need to buy a new zoom gear for it. Yes. So that you can still zoom the gear, because by putting the teleconverter on the back, it pushes the lens forward. It no longer lines up with the zoom gear. So having a dedicated zoom gear for the teleconverter allows you then to use the full zoom range. And instead of basically having a 10-17, you end up with something that's about like a 17-24 in fisheye terms.
And this actually has the CCAM zoom gear that's designed to use with the teleconverter, obviously. But you do, and that does add to the expense. This is not necessarily a cheap option, because you will also, as Alex mentioned, with the extension ring, you'll also need an extension for port extension. I have to say that I've used the teleconverters with a variety of different lenses, and I actually don't love the effect optically. I think that optically it is a compromise. And
well, I think however many HDs and pros can go right on this piece of glass, this is not a quality piece of glass, and it's certainly not optimized to be used with those lenses. And particularly because the Tokina 10-17 is optically not exactly the greatest piece of glass either. You are putting two unrelated and not especially great bits of glass together, and you are bringing quite a few compromises when you do that.
Yeah, and I think, so I think in general, if you have an option between using a lens without a wide angle lens without a teleconverter and one with a teleconverter, you're better off actually probably going with the one without a teleconverter in general. That brings me neatly on to, and there's a wide range of these, an ever increasing range of these, and these are adapters, we're now, particularly with the new mirrorless cameras from Canon and Sony and Nikon, we're seeing a whole bunch of adapters that are coming out that allow us to use conventional lenses, so Canon, EF, Nikon, F mount lenses, for example, with the new mirrorless lens mounts. And these vary. There are some very basic ones. The Nikon one, for example, the Z to F mount, is purely and simply just a mechanical adapter that fits between the two. Obviously, it transmits electronics, so we've got autofocus information and exposure information going forwards and backwards through the lens. But ultimately, it's really just an extension tube that has a different fitting on either side. It's no more complicated than that. And the problem with that is, of course, that does limit lens compatibility. So, for example, with the Z series lenses, even the Z50, which is the crop sensor one, you can't use the Tokina 10-17 with it, because it limits your lens capacity, because the adapter doesn't allow the lens focus. So we have a whole variety of adapters. There are increasing numbers of different adapters out there, but be careful with lens compatibility. Certainly, if you want to use older lenses like the 10-17, that may or may not be possible. And the more expensive adapters, for example, the Metabones ones do allow, I know there's a lot of people use the Metabones with the Sony, and it will allow the use of the 10-17. So, for example, you could use a Canon fitting EF mount, Tokina 10-17 with the Metabones adapter on the Sony mirrorless cameras. So,
and do you know, Adam, if you can use a Metabones to solve using the 10-17 on the crop sensor Z?
As far as I know, not, because I'm not sure that Metabones have a crop sensor Z. Okay. Have a Z mount Metabones available. Now, I have to say, I should point out that may be information that may be wrong as we go up.
And it's a changing world at the moment, so I think the forums are really your friend when it comes to these things. Find out what's going on.
I'm sure someone's going to come out with them, whether it's Metabones or someone else. There are quite a few announcements recently. I know Sigma are doing a range of adapters now that allow the use of their lenses, so Sigma lenses with a variety of the mirrorless options. But this is really, it's quite a fast changing thing. But bear in mind that not all adapters are equal. So when you're going into the adapter market, you've got a Z, for example, Nikon Z or an EOS R, and you want to use your existing lenses with it, make sure that what you're doing will work with your existing lenses. And as Alex correctly suggested, best place for this is to put it out on the forum, on the Wetpixel forum, and there'll be someone out there that's tried it and will be able to tell you whether it works or not.
Yeah.
So to say, it's a rapidly changing area.
And I would say, as a general rule, good third-party ones like Metabones are often more valuable than the manufacturer ones, because Nikon don't want to make you an adapter that allows you to use Canon lenses, and Canon don't want to make you an adapter that allows you to use Nikon lenses or Tokina lenses, whereas the third-party ones want to sell you adapters.
There is one other point as well, and this is a possibly slightly more generic point, but actually one of the advantages of buying into the Nikon Z system, for example, is that the mount flange is really clever. Pulling the lens closer in to the sensor is actually optically a really, really good idea. So when you buy into the Z system, you're buying into that technology, and then you put an adapter on it that moves the lens away from the sensor. So you're kind of almost defeating the object of buying into that technology. Now, until Nikon come up with native lenses that are useful for underwater, it's what you're going to have to do. But it's important to stress this is, although it's a convenient solution, it may not be optically the best solution long term. So anyway, right, and then we have some other things that we can attach, and these are things that we attach to the other end of the lens, so the front end of the lens. And we have a variety of options which attach into filter threads primarily at the end of the lenses. And I think the first one that we might talk about is one that's produced by CNC. I know you've got one there as well, Alex.
I think that's a bit of a strange place to start, really.
Okay. All right, well, you start.
Well, no, just because I think, many, if we do wide angle first, then I think many photographers attach things to the front of their wide angle lenses. I think in the days when most of our dome ports were smaller, and particularly a lot of our wide angle lenses didn't focus super close, we used to use very simple diopters on the front of those lenses. And they would do two things. First of all, they would pull the focus point of our lens back closer again, which when you use a dome port, particularly a small one, you really need a close focusing lens. And secondly, they would actually introduce some field curvature, because they were basically very simple magnifying glass type lenses, and that field curvature would actually help offset a little bit, I think, the curvature of the field created by a dome port. So they were valuable to use. I think when dome ports got bigger, what we found was that actually they didn't give much advantage. They would actually act to reduce the angle of coverage of the lens a little bit, and most people stopped using close-up diopters as the dome ports went from being predominantly 6-inch dome ports up to 8 and 9-inch dome ports. So from that, 180 mil up to 200 and 230 mil. I think that made a big difference. So we stopped using those, and that's kind of the history thing. And then I think a really interesting new development in that area is the CNC lens that puts a much more complicated piece of glass at the front of the system.
It's probably worth, I'm sorry, Alex, just talking about diopters for a minute. Obviously, that diopter has the same effect as putting a wet diopter on as well. So you can use that with a macro port. You can use with a macro lens, and it has the same effect as adding a wet lens. So again, it's permanent, it's attached.
I was going to come on to that in a minute.
we're getting our structure all confused.
That's why I was going to talk about that first of all anyway, because I think it's if you understand what they do. So if you want to talk about close-up lenses, the problem of using a simple magnifying glass type close-up lens on a macro lens is it creates that curved field. And that means you tend to get really good sharpness in the middle of the frame, and then the edges of the frame go smudgy or have a lot of chromatic aberration. And so you get a sharp middle and dodgy outsides. And actually what you need is a more compound lens. And most of the wet lenses that we buy nowadays, one of the reasons they're quite thick is they're not simple magnifying glasses.
No, it's a series
and they
of
create
lenses.
a nice flat focus plane. So you get sharpness in the middle of the picture and in the edges of the frame. And when we come to internal ones, the simple magnifying glass has that problem. But if you buy more complicated macro lenses, screw-on ones like this is a Nikon one, which is a multi-element macro lens to go inside the housing. I mean, you could use it outside, but it would eventually get all ruined. This is a multi-element one, and it's actually flat on both sides if you feel it. And that then gives good sharpness right to the edges of the picture. And there's a Canon equivalent to that, which is awkwardly called the 500D, which they then actually made a camera called the 500D. You'd think Canon would not call two products the same name. This is a Canon 500D. And again, you can buy this in different diameters. And this is a very good internal lens and very good optically corner to corner. Because it's not glass.
You can use it with a step down ring as well, can't you? So
yeah, you could buy one big one and use it with a step down ring. This is one I bought in a 72mm thread to use with the Sigma 150mm macro lens. And I can use it with a step down on my 105 if I want to. Typically these days, I don't use either of these lenses because I use wet diopters to do this job. But these are actually optically very good and can fit inside the port.
So I think the takeaway message is diopters, the more you spend, typically the better they are, and it makes a big difference. Unlike possibly some other things where extension tubes, for example, are a relatively cheap solution, optically are good. The optics of diopters make a huge difference. So it's worth getting the better ones. And so wide. Go on now, let's go on.
Yeah, so wide angle, generally a lot of the time we don't use them anymore because the dome ports have got bigger and people are better at setting up the dome ports. So there's less of a need those corrections. And the lenses now focus closer as well than they used to 20 years ago. But CNC produced this interesting product a few years ago, which I know you've got there, Adam. And this is designed to specifically correct the lens to match it better with the dome port. The dome port doesn't create a curved field, and this lens is designed to basically match that curved field and help get you better corner sharpness because of it. Now, and you've tried it, and you feel it does make a decent difference, Adam?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I've used it with a 1635 with a, I think last time I used it was with a big Zen 230mm dome. And I definitely felt that I was getting better corner sharpness than I can get without it. I think giving it a number is difficult, but certainly I think the corners were better at a comparable aperture.
My feeling was, and it's very difficult to do side by sides because you have to do one dive with it, take it off, and then do another dive. I found when I was using it, it definitely was no worse. I was struggling to see as big a advantage as some of the promotional images that I'd seen from it were suggesting it would do. So it's relatively expensive, or it's very expensive actually, and I have generally not been using it very much because I guess these days I don't use the 1635 particularly a lot, and there's not so many situations where I need to shoot it. If I am going to use it, I'm using it very aware that I'm probably going to be able to shoot it shut down anyway.
One of the things that we should point out about it is it was designed by CNC for a very specific lens extension and port combination. And whilst it may transfer adequately onto other combinations, it also may not. It's not an exact art. It is designed for something specific. So I'm sure CNC might quite rightly say, well, it works fine with ours, but it's made for ours. That's what it does. And so you need to test and experiment, and again chat to other people and find out what their experience has been of using it. And the forum's a great place to do that. Yeah, fantastic.
So, and then just to finish off, the final type of filter that you might want to attach to your camera are filters of different color effects. So these aren't doing anything optically than having color effects or having lightening, darkening effects. So we don't tend to use polarizing filters underwater. They don't tend to work with all the layers of glass and the nature of light underwater. But I'd love someone to find a really interesting use for polarizing filters. But we do use a number of different color filters. We use color filters for correcting for available light shooting. We also use color filters for helping us with fluorescent photography. We've covered both of those before on Wetpixel Live. And then we can also use neutral density filters. This is an ND8, which is a 3-stop neutral density filter. I'll put it in front of my camera so you can see how dark it is.
It's all gone
And all
dark.
this is doing is basically like a pair of sunglasses for the lens, but that might allow you to shoot at more open apertures for macro shooting or something like that. But that's another option that we can use in that area.
Yeah, and I think we're going outside this, so I'm now going to break our rule on this, but you can also attach these to, for example, a wet diopter or the outside of a lens port. So
Yeah.
if you've got a 67mm threaded lens port, you can put it on the outside of it. Obviously, it will get affected. It will damage the filter ultimately, but it's something then that gives you the option of adding and removing it. Obviously, once you add it inside the port, it's there for the dive, which if you have a specific creative need for that is worth doing. But otherwise, if the sun goes out, it's still, all your images are going to be a bit dark. You have to push the ISO quite hard.
Yeah, this is the one that I use on my, as you can see on my Trioplan, and it also fits on an Oriston 50mm, which is another vintage lens. If you've seen our vintage lens episode, this is really valuable because you're going in with those lenses with the aperture fixed way open.
Well, that's a yeah, exactly. So that's an obviously good example where you're definitely going to mount it internally and leave it there. Great. That's lots to talk about, lots to think about there. I'm sure that Alex, have you covered teleconverters and extension tubes in your book? I think you did, didn't you?
Yeah, teleconverters. Extension tubes, may have mentioned them in passing. I think they've dropped a little bit out of fashion now. I still use them, and I definitely like traveling with them. They're a great backup to take it on a trip. For example, if I'm going to use my wet diopter, and then you damage the thread on your port or something, and you can't use it for a macro trip. Having these in the bag, they weigh nothing.
Or you might lose it, Alex, because occasionally that happens.
Oh yes, yeah. Because obviously, Adam's referring to the fact that last time we were in Lembe, this time 2 years ago or 3 years ago. 2 years ago. I lost one of my SMC underwater for about 3 or 4 days.
It found its way back though, actually, which is great. Brilliant. So have a read of Alex's book for more information. And thank you very much, Alex. I'd like to thank our sponsor, which is Reef Photo and Video. I'd like to thank you all for watching. Please add a like because that does good for the channel, keeps us going. But also feel free to add comments or suggestions or questions to the comment section below. Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing you again soon.